present, and withdrew our eyes from the dreary landscape we traversed. Winter reigned in all its gloom. The leafless trees lay without motion against the dun sky. The forms of frost, mimicking the foliage of summer, strewed the ground. The paths were overgrown. The unplowed cornfields were patched with grass and weeds. The sheep congregated at the threshold of the cottage. The horned ox thrust his head from the window. The wind was bleak, and frequent sleet or snowstorms added to the melancholy appearance wintry nature assumed. We arrived at Rochester, and an accident caused us to be detained there a day. During that time a circumstance occurred that changed our plans, and which, alas, in its result changed the eternal course of events, turning me from the pleasant new-sprung hope I enjoyed to an obscure and gloomy desert. But I must give some little explanation before I proceed with the final cause of our temporary alteration of plan, and refer again to those times when man walked the earth fearless, before plague had become queen of the world. There resided a family in the neighborhood of Windsor, of very humble pretensions, but which had been an object of interest to us on account of one of the persons of whom it was composed. The family of the Claytons had known better days, but after a series of reverses the father died a bankrupt, and the mother, heartbroken, and a confirmed invalid, retired with her 5 children to a little cottage between Eton and Salt Hill. The eldest of these children, who was 13 years old, seemed at once, from the influence of adversity, to acquire the sagacity and principle belonging to a more mature age. Her mother grew worse and worse in health, but Lucy attended on her, and was as a tender parent to her younger brothers and sisters, and in the meantime showed herself so good-humored, social, and benevolent, that she was beloved by all as well as honored in her little neighborhood. Lucy was besides extremely pretty, so when she grew to be 16 it was to be supposed, notwithstanding her poverty, that she should have admirers. One of these was the son of a country curate. He was a generous, frank-hearted youth, with an ardent love of knowledge, and no mean acquirements. Though Lucy was untaught, her mother's conversation and manners gave her a taste for refinements superior to her present situation. She loved the youth even without knowing it, except that in any difficulty she naturally turned to him for aid, and awoke with a lighter heart every Sunday, because she knew that she would be met and accompanied by him in her evening walk with her sisters. She had another admirer, one of the head waiters at the inn at Salt Hill. He also was not without pretensions to urbane superiority, such as he learnt from gentlemen's servants and waiting-maids, who, initiating him in all the slang of high life below stairs, rendered his arrogant temper 10 times more intrusive. Lucy did not disclaim him. She was incapable of that feeling. But she was sorry when she saw him approach, and quietly resisted all his endeavors to establish an intimacy. The fellow soon discovered that his rival was preferred to him, and this changed what was at first a chance admiration into a passion, whose mainsprings were envy and a base desire to deprive his competitor of the advantage he enjoyed over himself. Poor Lucy's sad story was but a common one. Her lover's father died, and he was left destitute. He accepted the offer of a gentleman to go to India with him, feeling secure that he should soon acquire an independence, and return to claim the hand of his beloved. He became involved in the war carried on there, was taken prisoner, and years elapsed before tidings of his existence were received in his native land. In the meantime disastrous poverty came on Lucy. Her little cottage, which stood looking from its trellis covered with woodbine and jessamine, was burnt down, and the whole of their little property was included in the destruction. Whither betake them? By what exertion of industry could Lucy procure them another abode? Her mother, nearly bedrid, could not survive any extreme of famine-strict poverty. At this time her other admirer stepped forward and renewed his offer of marriage. He had saved money and was going to set up a little inn at Datchet. There was nothing alluring to Lucy in this offer, except the home it secured to her mother, and she felt more sure of this, since she was struck by the apparent generosity which occasioned the present offer. She accepted it, thus sacrificing herself for the comfort and welfare of her parent. It was some years after her marriage that we became acquainted with her. The accident of a storm caused us to take refuge in the inn, where we witnessed the brutal and quarrelsome behavior of her husband, and her patient endurance. Her lot was not a fortunate one. Her first lover had returned with the hope of making her his own, and met her by accident for the first time as the mistress of his country inn, and the wife of another. He withdrew despairingly to foreign parts. Nothing went well with him. At last he enlisted, and came back again wounded and sick, and yet Lucy was debarred from nursing him. Her husband's brutal disposition was aggravated by his yielding to the many temptations held out by his situation, and the consequent disarrangement of his affairs. Fortunately, she had no children, but her heart was bound up in her brothers and sisters, and these his avarice and ill temper soon drove from the house. They were dispersed about the country, earning their livelihood with toil and care. He even showed an inclination to get rid of her mother, but Lucy was firm here. She had sacrificed herself for her. She had lived for her. She would not part with her. If the mother went, she would also go beg bread for her, die with her, but never desert her. The presence of Lucy was too necessary in keeping up the order of the house, and in preventing the whole establishment from going to wreck, for him to permit her to leave him. He yielded the point, but in all accesses of anger, or in his drunken fits, he recurred to the old topic, and stung poor Lucy's heart by opprobrious epithets bestowed on her parent. A passion, however, if it be wholly pure, entire, and reciprocal, brings with it its own solace. Lucy was truly and from the depth of heart devoted to her mother. The sole end she proposed to herself in life was the comfort and preservation of this parent. Though she grieved for the result, yet she did not repent of her marriage, even when her lover returned to bestow competence on her. 3 years had intervened, and how in their penniless state could her mother have existed during this time? This excellent woman was worthy of her child's devotion. A perfect confidence and friendship existed between them. Besides, she was by no means illiterate, and Lucy, whose mind had been in some degree cultivated by her former lover, now found in her the only person who could understand and appreciate her. Thus, though suffering, she was by no means desolate, and when during fine summer days she led her mother into the flowery and shady lanes near their abode, a gleam of unmixed joy enlightened her countenance. She saw that her parent was happy, and she knew that this happiness was of her sole creating. Meanwhile her husband's affairs grew more and more involved. Ruin was near at hand, and she was about to lose the fruit of all of her labors, when pestilence came to change the aspect of the world. Her husband reaped benefit from the universal misery, but as the disaster increased, the spirit of lawlessness seized him. He deserted his home to revel in the luxuries promised him in London, and found there a grave. Her former lover had been one of the first victims of the disease, but Lucy continued to live for and in her mother. Her courage only failed when she dreaded peril for her parent, or feared that death might prevent her from performing those duties to which she was unalterably devoted. When we had quitted Windsor for London, as the previous step to our final emigration, we visited Lucy, and arranged with her the plan of her own and her mother's removal. Lucy was sorry at the necessity which forced her to quit her native lanes and village, and to drag an infirm parent from her comforts at home, to the homeless waste of depopulate earth, but she was too well disciplined by adversity, and of too sweet a temper, to indulge in repinings at what was inevitable. Subsequent circumstances, my illness and that of Idris, drove her from our remembrance, and we called her to mind at last only to conclude that she made one of the few who came from Windsor to join the emigrants, and that she was already in Paris. When we arrived at Rochester, therefore, we were surprised to receive, by a man just come from Slough, a letter from this exemplary sufferer. His account was that, journeying from his home and passing through Datchet, he was surprised to see smoke issue from the chimney of the inn, and supposing that he should find comrades for his journey assembled there, he knocked and was admitted. There was no one in the house but Lucy and her mother. The latter had been deprived of the use of her limbs by an attack of rheumatism, and so one by one all the remaining inhabitants of the country set forward, leaving them alone. Lucy entreated the man to stay with her. In a week or two her mother would be better, and they would then set out. But they must perish if they were left thus helpless and forlorn. The man said that his wife and children were already among the emigrants, and it was therefore, according to his notion, impossible for him to remain. Lucy, as a last resource, gave him a letter for Idris, to be delivered to her wherever he should meet us. This commission at least he fulfilled, and Idris received with emotion the following letter. Honored Lady, I am sure that you will remember and pity me, and I dare hope that you will assist me. What other hope have I? Pardon my manner of writing. I am